has been criticized for his response to the oil spill, but he has an ally in a rather unlikely place. Here now, that ally, Congressman Ron Paul, Republican from Texas. Congressman Paul, it's wonderful to see you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I know, sir, that you have come to the defense of the president on this issue. You've described yourself as a pretty strong critic of him and his administration. Why do you think that he's done an okay job when it comes to the oil spill?
Well, in its entirety, I guess I would dissect that out. But in general, I would say that it's been unfair for him to get all the blame for an accident committed by an oil company. And at the same time, I said that I think we overly blame George Bush for the hurricane. I mean, there's sort of limits to what governments can do. I did suggest that he could have done more to get out of the way and allow the states and individual property owners to do what they could to protect their property. But to blame the president for everything that has gone wrong down there, I just think that we've developed a culture where everything is to be solved by the government. You know, anything that goes wrong, the president is responsible. He has to take care of it. So I think even his allies, Democratic allies, have come down pretty hard on him, and at times unfairly. I'd much rather them talk about why the war is continuing and why we target American citizens for assassination and a few other things like that, and not come down hard on them for not doing enough about the oil leak.
Let me just follow up on your point about how everyone's saying that they want the government. We did a non-scientific or an unscientific survey today on CNBC. Said, who do you blame more for the oil spill, Congressman Paul? And our results were 41% of our viewers said they blame BP more than the government. 59% blame the government more than BP. And I guess my question to you is this. You know, you mentioned the Democrats, but what the great irony seems to be is that a lot of people on the right, a lot of Republicans are the ones criticizing the president for not doing enough. The very people who a few weeks ago were saying government should get out of things are now saying government should get in.
Well, I think there's a lot of partisanship. I like to think of how this would have been accomplished if we'd have had a freer market and property rights. If you'd have had property rights, somebody would have owned the fishing rights, and oil drillers couldn't go in there unless they got permission from the fishermen. And there would have to be provisions. There have to be bonds put up, and there'd have to be provisions for accidents like this. But no, government gives them permission. They limit the liability of the oil companies, and then they say the taxpayer will pick up. That's a moral hazard by saying the government is going to inspect and give the license and protect everybody. So It's the system that is wrong, rather than saying, well, the government just hasn't done enough. They probably did too much too soon, and we should think about another approach to problems like this.
Would you remove the limits on liabilities then, the cap?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they shouldn't have any limits. I mean, it's a rich company. The people on the left who think they want to protect some of these people who have suffered by bankrupting the country and not buying their oil. No, you don't want to bankrupt this country. This is a healthy company. But they should be held 100% liable for anybody who has lost. And those are the kind of contracts that would have been designed in the marketplace rather than having the government give the permits and the inspections and set them up. So I think that process is wrong.
Do you, though, I mean, I guess if people are concerned, if you do that with the oil industry, you could do it across the board. That hits our broader issue of tort reform and whether we're too sue-happy of a country, and companies would be so busy worrying about lawsuits that they don't go ahead and do needed investments. I mean, how far do I take your argument of getting rid of the liability cap on oil companies?
Well, people should be liable for the harm they cause. The question isn't who's going to pay. The question is who's going to pay. The people who were responsible or the taxpayer who wasn't responsible. So those are terrible choices. I would say it would be easy to say, well, the people who were responsible, the oil companies should have been. Because I think it's terrible to limit their liability and dump it on the taxpayers. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Would you support big changes in our energy policy now that, I guess, permanently end as quickly as possible deep water drilling?
No, I wouldn't want to end it. I would make it stricter, and that they would have to promise to protect anybody that was involved or exposed, like the fishermen and the shorelines. Rather than having government given the contracts, they would have to have an agreement with the people who might get hurt. So we would change the conditions. But, you know, how many thousands, like 30,000 wells have been drilled out there?
Yep.
I mean, it's a horrible accident, but it's an accident. I mean, do you think BP likes this kind of stuff? I mean, it's not like they committed a criminal act. It's the fact that there was an accident. And, yeah, I think it was the conditions of dependency on government and the government being the lender and the protector and the investigator and of the last resort that brings on problems like this.
One final question before we go. Yesterday, the Washington Post had done a story about how you invest in gold-related names, and they had given it as an example of how people in Congress can have conflicts of interest investing in what they're regulating or voting on. Certainly, it would seem that way in the case of a defense contract, for example, if the congressman's investing in a company that's up for a defense contract. In your case, it really did seem different. You're simply putting your money where your mouth is. And Jim Cramer just had a question for you. He said he thinks you should stay away from gold stocks and just buy the bullion via the GLD. Will you take his advice?
Well, I'm not going to take his advice, but it's not the worst advice in the world. You know, this idea that this may be a conflict of interest is sort of like if I owned a newspaper and I defended the First Amendment, it was a conflict of interest, you know, to defend the First Amendment because it protected my right to publish a newspaper. No, I think that you can go one step further if you want to be real conservative. Go one step further. Don't just buy the GLD, but buy the coins themselves. They're legal tender. You know, isn't it ironic they suggest a conflict of interest by buying something the government makes, legal tender gold coins, the old gold coins and new gold coins? They say, oh, what's he doing wrong? He's buying this only to make the point that, you know, if they ever had sound money and balanced the budget, the dollar would be fixed to gold. There'd be no incentive to invest or speculate in gold. One
final question to you on that point of conflicts of interest, though. Do you think it's fair, you know, I mean, you've been part of writing the financial reform bill, that you, as someone who's been part of that legislation, would have the right to buy, say, shares of Goldman Sachs and then go in and fight tooth and nail to fight regulation on Goldman Sachs? Shouldn't it be that if you're on a committee that regulates an industry, you shouldn't be allowed to buy individual companies in that industry?
Well, the whole problem is that we're involved in so much. It's because government is so big and they regulate, there's so many conflicts. But if you had men of character, men and women of character that wouldn't do anything for their special interest by writing regulations that might benefit them, then you wouldn't have this problem. But the biggest problem is that the government is so involved in the economy. But the most important thing that is all that is out in the open. If I'm going to write favorable regulations for Goldman Sachs and I own Goldman Sachs stock, it should be well known. And that gets pretty shady there on the proper role on ethics in that situation.
All right, Congressman Paul, thanks so much. Good to see you again, sir.
Thank you.